Hello everyone. In this video, I'd like to talk to you about using the Ameritrade API with Google Sheets and Google Scripts. Now basically the need here is to get live quotes from Ameritrade, and this is a perk of being an Ameritrade account holder in that they allow you to use their system to retrieve quotes, options, prices, and many different things, including executing trades. Alright, in this video, I'm just going to show you an example of using Ameritrade API with Google Sheets and Google Scripts to obtain quotes. Alright? I will be covering the following topics. Firstly, I'll give an overview of the Ameritrade API processes. It is a bit more complicated than we think, but hopefully after this overview you will get an idea of the steps required. These include the authentication process, bearer token process, and finally maybe one or two examples on obtaining information using the Ameritrade API. Okay, from steps 2 to 5, that will all be done using Google Sheets and Google Scripts. So firstly, here we are on our PC, and here is the Ameritrade server. What we'd like to do is to make a request to the Ameritrade server for a certain stock quote, and we would then expect to receive the stock quote, the price, right? Now, Ameritrade only provides this service to its members. So what it needs then is proof from us that we are an account holder. So there is something called a bearer token that we also need to send with our request. So the bearer token is like a key that is only valid for a certain time that you can send to Ameritrade, and with that they will authenticate that you are the account holders and have a right to request, make the request. And this of course could include things like requesting for an execution of trades, selling stock, buying stock. So this is a pretty serious security feature. All right, so the question now is, how do we get a bearer token? And there's a process to request for that, and basically a very high level request, similar to if you access your Ameritrade or ThinkokSwim account. There's a way for you to sign in and verify that it is you. It does leverage the same process, so you have a way to request authorization from Ameritrade, and with that request they will then return two things: a bearer token and a refresh token. Now the bearer token is the one that you need to make your requests for stock quotes and other executions. The refresh token is something that you'll need to get a new bearer token, alright? And this is because bearer tokens expire in 30 minutes, that's not very long. So you need a refresh token to get a new bearer token. Refresh tokens expire in 90 days. When you log in and authenticate that it is you with your sign-on, then you get the refresh token, which you could reuse for up to 90 days, after which you need to request the authorization again. Alright, so there is this separate process here for requesting a new bearer token after the bearer token has expired, and then receiving the bearer token. Okay, so these are the three main process steps that we need to execute within Google Scripts. And of course the bottom, the first process, requesting stock quotes, you can replace that with many other different instructions, as we'll see. Firstly, a disclaimer. I am not paid by Ameritrade or anyone to create this video, and I'm basically just sharing this so that others who may need to do what I am doing at least have a start. All right, I am in no way an expert. And a lot of this was found out through trial and error, and I thought it'd be good to share it with those who also would like to access this great service. All right. So here you see the Ameritrade API web page, and all the information that I'm sharing can actually be gleaned from these documents and the APIs and also some other videos on YouTube that I've found, and I'll put a link in the description below. The first thing you need to do though is to register if you're not already registered. And up here is how you register for an account. You'll get an email verification, and once you're done, then you should be able to log in. So after you've logged in, you should see My Apps on the top left. If you click on that, you will have a way to add an app. Now, as a local user, a private user, we can only create a single app. So add a new app, give it a name, callback URL, you should use a local host. So 127.0.0.1 is the same as saying this PC that I'm using, and give a name for it if you'd like. Hit create, and Ameritrade should respond to you pretty quickly, and so you can see that it's been approved. If you look at some of the details, the most important is the consumer key that identifies this app to Ameritrade. All right. Now this, you should definitely keep this secret, as this app is just for your account only. In this example, I will of course delete this and recreate a new app for myself. But so this is just for the video. I would suggest that you copy this key and keep it somewhere safe in a notepad somewhere on your computer that you can easily reference. So now going to the APIs, Ameritrade offers quite a few APIs to access the different information and to execute stock trades. So for this example, we'll just look at quotes. Now there are two types of quotes. You can get a single quote, or you can get two or more quotes. In this example, we'll just focus on the single quote. And they have provided quite a nice page to interactively let you access the API. And also to explore all the different parameters that are needed for you to automate this whole process. So you can see the resource URL includes a section here for the stock quote. Now this one here, I've got Apple. I can put the Intel. Okay. And in the API key, this is where you need to enter your key. They've provided a very nice drop down where you can fill the key by selecting your app. The authorization, this is where you need to get the bearer token, and the bearer token format here is bearer space followed by the key, and this is a whole big jumble of keys that you will receive. All right. When you hit send, you will then see the response. Hopefully you'll see the stock price, and it's all in an XML format. If not, you'll see the error codes as well. You'll also see the request, and also the URL, how the request was formed. Alright, so we need to be able to retrieve a bearer key, a bearer token. So to receive the bearer token, Ameritrade also provides an API, the Authentication API, where you can request for the bearer token. Now you can see that there are 6 parameters that needs to be filled, and typically you can get the bearer token by itself, or you can also get a refresh token at the same time, and that is what we are going to do in this example, is to always get the refresh token as well. So under grant type, you would have the authorization code. Leave this blank and put this to offline. We'll skip this for now. Client ID is your API key that you recorded before. And this one would be the localhost. So the question is, what code is this? So here's where we left off, and let's now look at the authorization process. How do we receive the bearer token and refresh token? Authorization is made via an API, it's programmatic. And because it's programmatic, there needs to be a way to embed an authorization code to the API. When the server receives that, it can then create the bearer token and refresh token and deliver it back to you. Now the whole question is, how do you then get this authorization code? An API is programmatic, so there isn't a way to sign on to Ameritrade to provide this authorization code. That needs to be done in real time by you, the user. So there is another process where you can sign in and authenticate yourself via a link that's provided by Ameritrade. Ameritrade will then verify that you are who you are and create an authorization code and return that authorization code to you. It does that by a very peculiar way. It returns it as an error page. So it looks as though you received an error, when you tried to sign in. But in fact, the authorization code is embedded in the return URL on the web page. We'll see that as we go along, so it becomes a lot clearer. The authorization code is then extracted, and you can then proceed with the API call. Now, we did mention that we are using Google Scripts for this example, and that actually adds another layer of complexity to this whole sequence. And that is because Google Scripts is running on a server somewhere in the cloud, on Google's cloud. So the new model looks somewhat like this. Now here you are on your PC, and you are the client, so that's called the client side. There's the Ameritrade server, and now there's another aspect to deal with, and that's called the Google Scripts server side. Okay, so the scripts can access the Ameritrade server programmatically. If it has the authorization code, it can obtain the bearer token and refresh token. But there needs to be a whole sign-in process. So Google Scripts can create an HTML link that points to the Ameritrade sign-on page. Okay, you, the user, would then click that link, which would go into Ameritrade, where you can sign on with your password and your authentication. When that is authenticated, it returns an error page with the code embedded in the URL, as I mentioned. You would then need to manually copy and paste that URL into the HTML form, and that URL text is returned to the program, which can then extract the authorization code and then proceed with the API call. Okay, this looks somewhat complicated, but hopefully this helps you visualize what actually needs to happen as we write the program to accomplish this whole effect, right? To receive the bearer token and the refresh token. So let's now go to Google Sheets, and this is a new spreadsheet. Let's give it a title. And this is an example page, so I'd like to be able to obtain a stock quote. Here I would type the symbol, let's say Apple, and I'll expect this to give me the quote, the latest quote, the stock price. Now what I would like to happen to implement this would be that there would be a menu up here that I would be able to click and choose to sign on or authenticate myself, and get a side pane where I can click the link as well as enter or paste the return URL. Alright, so let's go to Google Scripts, Tools, Script Editor. Now the first thing is to give this project a title. And I'd like to remind myself that this script here resides on the server side, right? It's not on my PC, it's actually in the cloud. Now to create a menu, you would use the onOpen function that will run when the spreadsheet is opened. Like a variable of the current spreadsheet, okay, get that into a variable name. And the menu items, you could create more than one item. So here's the format for the menu. This is an authenticate menu item, and let's say I'd like it to call a function called Ameritrade underscore show pane. Okay, this will show a pane to the right of my sheets and allow me to click the link as well as paste the URL that is returned. And so this is the command to add a menu. The name of this menu item, let's call it Ameritrade APIs, and the menu items would be that. Alright, so save this and let's try running that. Notice now at the top there is no Ameritrade menu. If we refresh the page, then you can see the API menu item, and you can then click on the authenticate item. Okay, and since this is first time I'm running a script, you need to allow or give permission for scripts to run. Go into to allow it, go to advanced and click allow. This will allow the script to run, and you'll see an error here because we have not written the show pane function yet. All right, so let's go back to our script editor and create that function. Now this pane is going to be opened asynchronously, so that's what that means is that when you open the pane, it does not wait for the pane to respond to you, right? It's asynchronous. There is no waiting. It happens at the same time. So everything has to be handled very neatly to keep all the information flowing at the right times. After the HTML page, if you enter the URL, then it will return to this program by calling another function. Okay, and I'll call that back from pane. Now there are several things I need. First is one is the variable for my API key, and I'll call that API key. And this is that long string. If we look at from my apps, you can see the key. Just copy that and put that in here. Alright, so now I've got the API key as a variable. And the other thing that I need would be, what is that link to Ameritrade to sign in? Okay, and that is obtained from guides. If you go to the guides, you can see under simple authorization for local apps, it gives an example of how that link should be called. Okay, so you could just copy that string out and paste it in there and adjust it so that you have the correct API key at the right place. So in this case, this is an example. We should replace that with the API key. Okay, this is the link that we need to call. We also need to create an HTML page. And the HTML is created from a file that we will be creating after this. Alright, and that uses the function called HTML service create template from file, and let's call that file Ameritrade site pane. Okay, it will be .html. And we will need to evaluate that. Finally, then you need to show the site pane. Well, they call it sidebar. And that is from the variable HTML. Okay, so this will show, this is the function to show a site pane. Let's save that. Okay, let's make the HTML page by going to File, New, HTML file, and this file name would be the same as we had indicated there. It's amtd site pane. Okay, amtd site pane. This is where I like to remind myself again, now this is on the client side. Okay. So the first thing here is the HTML. I would like to put a title using the header 1. And some instructions would be good to remind myself of what's going on. This would launch the Ameritrade sign in process and obtain a response code. Okay, and here I would have a link. The link that is provided. Target blank so that it would open a new page when it is clicked. And maybe more instructions, after logging in. And here's where I would put an input ID so that I can fill in the form. In step 2, I would then use that return URI to obtain the var token. And here I would put 2 buttons. The first one would be to be an execute button. Step 2, maybe, let's call it step 2. When it's clicked, it would run this program, this function, button enter. And the second button will be just a cancel button in case I'd like to cancel out instead of executing. Okay, so I need now to write the scripts that would be run when the buttons are clicked. And the first one, button enter. And the second one would be a simple one, button close. Is to close the side pane, and this is done by calling Google script close. Okay, for the enter function, I call that step 2. It needs to return the text that we pasted in the form. This gets the text from the text return URI up here, the value of that, into a variable, and then I want to send this variable back in the dictionary in case I need to send back more than one variable. Okay, the key and the variable is the same, and that's not a problem. And if it's successfully returned, then I would like it to close the pane. Alright, so I need to put a success handler, and call that close function down below. And this is only the success handler would be if the back from pane program works successfully. Okay, so this is the HTML of the side pane. Let's go back and see how that all works. Now, I haven't had the function for the back from pane program, so let's put it here so that it won't spawn any errors. And so D would be the dictionary that is passed back to me. And with that, then I can run another program, let's say to get refresh, the bearer token and the refresh token. And this would take the value of the dictionary, the return URI. Okay, and I'll stop it right there. Make sure that I can call this function with the URI that I pasted, and I'll log it and so that I can check that it actually came through okay. Let's save that. And let's call the authenticate function. Authorize. AMTD show pane, spelling was wrong, so let's get that corrected. One more time. And here you can see the site pane. Step 1, click here to login. Some error there. Let's go in and correct that. Whoops. Let's close it. Run it again. Okay. Cancel button works. And if I type some text here, and I click step 2, it closes on success. Let's look at the log file, and it came through. All right, so that all works so far. So the next thing we need to do is to fill in the link, the missing link to get to. Now, this, if you recall, is stored in the variable link URL. And this is an HTML file. And we can't just put a variable name in here, but we need to reference it. So the way that's done is using this syntax. And with this, then it would replace what's within these angular brackets with the value of this parameter. Okay, that's what this syntax means. All right. So if we save that and we run that, This link now will open the login page. Okay, and this is where you can log in with your credentials. In my case, I have two-factor authentication, so I will need to provide permission on my phone. That's for extra security. Then when that's approved, then I can click allow. And here's where you get this error page, right? This site can't be reached. It looks a bit problematic, but not to worry. The code is actually returned in the address, so all you gotta do is click up there, select the entire thing, press Ctrl C or Command C, and copy that. Alright, we don't need this anymore. And you can go back here and paste that whole string and go to step 2. Now if you look at the log, then you'll see that the entire response URL is provided. So the next step then is to create the function that will pass this response text, strip out the unnecessary elements, and just record down what's in the code. Okay. So now we're going to do the function to decode the URI component, and basically it is relatively simple. It might be good at this time here to paste the URI that we received, so that we can at least remember it if we need to reference it. So that's what is contained in the variable s right now, and we need to process that. Now if you notice, the URI is returned with many percent signs. You see these? It's all encoded URI, and that is so that the address can contain characters that are not, what would you say, allowed. So it's encoded URI, and we need to decode it. There is a function in JavaScript and Google Scripts that allows you to change that, decode it. So that's what this function does, decode URI component. It basically takes the string that's provided and it replaces all the percent and the hex numbers with the correct character. So that in itself would work to decode it. But here then I would only want the section that is after, from here onwards, after the word code. So I can do that by using the substring function, and I'll start from wherever I can find the word code, ending with the equal sign, and that's 5 characters. So I want to move the index down by 5. And we can have a look at that if we want to. We don't need that anymore. Let's put this my code. Alright, and there's a way you can do that. I can force this. Okay, force the parameter s so that I don't need to rerun that whole UI. And I just want to test this part, make sure that it can decode correctly. So let's use Google Scripts debugging capability, change the function to the function that I want to test, and press run. Okay, it's run, and let's look at the log file, and that is now my code. So my code is, is extracted correctly, right? No more percent signs. Okay, so let's redo that so that's correct. I should put a comment as to what this function does. So this will basically receive the URI, strip out the code, and call Ameritrade to receive error token and refresh token. So now that I have the code, I will need to call Ameritrade, and this is now the next step. Okay, what is that URL to call, and what parameters do we need to send along? You can find this out from the API. And these are the parameters that are needed to be sent. And here's the URL that needs to be called. So the first thing to do is copy that. That's the URL to be called. And the parameters that we need can be passed along in some variables. So there are two aspects of the variables that we could use. One is form data, and another are options. Now, by right, we should only need one of these, but I found that the Ameritrade API somehow throws an error, and this seems to solve that problem. Once you have the URL, you can then get a result by using this the URL fetch app command. Okay, so under the options, when you call the fetch app, URL fetch app, you'd have two parameters there. One is the type of the method of the request, and the second one then is the payload that we're sending along, and this is where form data comes in. So form data has all the parameters that we have over here. Okay, the first one is a grant type. Let's put them all in first so that we have it. We don't need refresh token. We need the access type. We need the code. We need the client ID. And we also need the redirect URI. Okay, so first one, this one, as we see for the bearer token and refresh token, we need this to be the authorization code. Access type, we saw that it should be offline, right? Offline. The code is my code, that's what we decoded. Client ID is your API key. And the redirect URI is your local host address. Okay, so with this then you can fetch the results. So here again is where we'd like to check whether we receive the results. We can use the log. Let's put it here and see if we got the right results. Let's save that. I think I'm going to reuse this, so just for testing purposes, keep this as S. Oh, I have a error here. This equal sign should not be there. Okay, looks good. And let's see if we get the bearer token. Needs new permissions. Every time you add more functionality, you will need to approve the access. Okay. Invalid grant. Nothing logged. Most likely the code would have expired, so we might need to re-log in again. And so why don't we test that whole process? And if we go here, we need to log in again. I'm going to verify it. And allow. Get the error page. Copy that. Close that. I'm going to put it in here just in case. And paste it here as well. And go to step 2. It closed. So here we can see that the result, the returned, is in this format. It's an object. It's got both bearer token and refresh token. At this point, it's also good to copy that out so that you can remember what it looks like. And keep this as a comment. You can use this toggle comment, and just so that we can remember what that format looks like. So the result is a JSON object. So what we would like to do is to pass that. Okay, so it's passed all the keys, and we can now extract the items we're interested in. And the first one is the access token, or bearer token as you might call it. In this case it's called an access token. Let's copy that. And we also want the refresh token. This one. There are other elements and tells you when it expires, and there's the refresh token expires, and when this access token expires, and the token type is bearer. Right? But we don't need all that extra other information. So let's test this out by logging both tokens. And let's see if it works. Alright, save the file. And I will skip through. We'll probably need to log in again, but I will skip through all that. And we'll come back after we get the verification. Okay, so paste the response. Go to step 2. Now we can see access token and the refresh token successfully retrieved. Alright, that's great. Let's move on. So the next thing to consider then is where we would store the bearer token, the access token, as well as the refresh token. Now, one idea could be that we would make a spreadsheet, a new sheet here, that you could store the values of both tokens, and then when you needed it, you could read the values and call the API that way. But that's not very elegant for several reasons. One is, of course, that the user could inadvertently edit the token, and another one would be that if you wanted to call the API from another script, so let's say you have more than one worksheet that does Ameritrade stuff, then the values would be on the wrong worksheet. So a more elegant solution would be to put these two tokens into what is known as user properties. Alright, so that is it's a feature of Google Scripts. For properties, this is called the properties service. There are 3 types of properties, and one would be the script. That means if it's within this script, it would be able to access these properties that you set. The second one would be by the document, so not just the script, but by this whole document. And the third one would be by the user. So if it's the same user, the properties would be common to that user across all worksheets, right? So that is the one that we're going to use for this example. And in that case, we're going to create a property here. We'll call it user properties. And this is from the properties service. and here you would get user properties. Alright, so you set this to a variable for all the user properties, and the way you would use it then would be when you've called the tokens to then save that to the properties. So user properties, and here you can set property, and you need it's like the dictionary, you need a key and a value. So the obvious ones would be to use these names, right, and repeat this for the refresh token. Okay, so this way you would save both these values to the user's properties. So another thing that we need to do would be to save the times, the date times of when these tokens were obtained. Now, and that's because they each have expiries, and we then need to be aware of whether they are expired or not, so that we can programmatically figure out whether they are still valid or whether we need to get new tokens. All right. So here's where we need to save the times that they were created, and this can be done using the date function, and this can be for both the access token as well as the refresh token. Alright, so save this. Now for debugging purposes, it'll be good to be able to check that these values were indeed updated and saved correctly and the dates were refreshed. So we could create a function that allowed us to store these values or display these values in our spreadsheet. And let's just say that we would like to display it, let's say over here, right? So let's call this I want to see the access token here and the refresh token here, right? Like the dates they were updated, and put the tokens in these locations, right? So we would code that, and let's call the function to put the tokens on the spreadsheet, amtd put tokens. All right, and let's create the function here. And just to remind ourselves why this function exists is to put the access and the refresh tokens and their times from user properties in the spreadsheet. So we need to know what spreadsheet to use, and this allows us to change that if we needed to, and we'll use this spreadsheet name is example. So, and the ranges that we're going to place the tokens at, and that would be at D9 and D10. Okay, we now need to be able to access the sheet, so it's always standard to create a variable for the current spreadsheet. The active spreadsheet, and the source sheet that we're going to write to is get sheet by name. and the name is stored in token sheet. Alright, so let's get the tokens out from user properties. So var access token and user properties. Get the property by the name, and the name here would be access token. And likewise for the other three items. Let's put them all here. And this one will be access time. This one will be the refresh token. And this one would be refresh time. Alright. So now that we have retrieved the tokens from the user property space, we need to store them in the spreadsheet. And here's where we use the source sheet and get range function. We'll use the string notation, and we stored that. So this is for the access token. That's this one. And we'd like to set the value. And the value would be that variable. And likewise for the refresh token, it would be this one. Now for the times, we can use a similar format, but we'll use the offset function. So if you notice in the spreadsheet, it's this location that we've referenced, and you offset it by 1 to the left in the column. So you can use the offset function. No offset in row, and -1, and set that value to the access time. And likewise for the refresh function, we'll do that as well. Zero, -1. All right, let's save that. So let's now test everything out to make sure that everything's working right. Let's go here and do the authentication function. And as usual, I'll skip through the logging in and come back when I've got the response text. Okay, so I have the response text. Let's paste it here, and let's go to step 2. Well, we see something did change, but didn't get updated correctly, so let's debug that. So it did write something, but it wrote blanks, so it's got to be related to this area. Oh, you can see that the cap is cap sensitive, so that has to be the lowercase user properties, else it would be a different property service, right? So let's try that one more time. Let's put these values back here again, just so that we can see them being replaced or updated. And we'll come back here again. So we're back now, and let's paste the response text and click step 2. And here you can see the updated tokens. So here's the access token, refresh token, and their dates. Okay, so let's do a quick recap of what we've done. We did manage to create the Ameritrade HTML link, and then on the site pane, on the PC side, you would click it. It would then launch the sign-in and authentication page on the Ameritrade server. You receive the error page, copy that URL, paste it into the site pane, and that URL is sent back to the script. The script extracts the authorization code, which is then used to access the authorization API on the Ameritrade server, and we managed to receive bearer token and refresh token. Okay, great. So on to the next step. So the next step is to look at how we get a quote. So basically from the PC side, you would enter the stock parameters of interest. On the script side, then it would do several things. It basically needs to create the API parameters so that you can call the API, the quote API, right? But it also needs to check that the bearer token is valid. Now, bearer tokens expire in 30 minutes, so relatively quickly. So, but if it is valid, then it can generate the parameters for the API, which includes the bearer token, right? And from there, then the Ameritrade server, it will check the bearer token, and if all is okay, it will return the quote info to the script. Now, if the token is expired, right, then we also need to check that the refresh token, which is used to get a new bearer token, right, the refresh token has to be valid as well. Now, if it is, then we can get a fresh bearer token by calling yet another API. It's actually the similar one to the authentication API, but with different parameters, except now that you include the refresh token. And you will then receive a fresh bearer token that will last for another 30 minutes. And with that, then you can go ahead and get your quote. If your refresh token is expired, and that takes 90 days to expire, then you need to re-authenticate yourself and get fresh bearer token as well as refresh token. This whole procedure again, right? Of doing the HTML, the site pane and all that. This is the authentication procedure. So for the next step, we're going to just focus on this central part of creating the function to check for token validity, and if not, then getting fresh bearer tokens as well as getting re-authentication when required. All right. So we're back in the code, and I just thought I'd put a comment here too. This is actually for debugging, right? So when we display the bearer token and access token in the spreadsheet, that's just so that we can double check the information. But when everything is running smoothly, we don't really need that. So we could comment this this function out so that we don't need to write the tokens into the spreadsheet. Another thing that I thought of renaming would be this function. Instead of calling it get refresh tokens, it actually gets both the access or bearer token as well as the refresh token. So actually this gets both tokens. So I'm just going to call it get tokens, and there. All right. So this is where we are at right now, and we need to create the intermediate function to check that the refresh token is valid, and create the bearer token for the API. So let's call that a new function, Ameritrade. Now if you notice, I just like the naming convention. If I put the AMTD function letters in front, that means that these all belong to the Ameritrade API type of functions. And eventually it would make sense to create another file just for Ameritrade API calls, because in my code file, I may want to have a lot of other functions that are not related to Ameritrade, for example, right? So it's nice to compartmentalize it. So here's Ameritrade, and this one I'd like to really just get the bearer token. So this one's call Ameritrade, get using the refresh token. Alright, so the first one is, let's get the tokens that we have and the dates and all that from user properties. This one got me the last time. It's just a small letter. Okay. And likewise, I'd get all the other parameters that we stored. Refresh time. And the access time. So these were the 4 things that we stored in user properties. So now let's check for the validity of the refresh token by using the refresh time. Right, so we need the current time, so let's put that into a variable. This is my now time, and this would be current date time. Okay, so if my now, and I need to pass this into a date format, so I can use that date pass function. So if this one, if the current time minus the excess time, right? And let's do the date pass of the excess time. And this must be less than 30 minutes. So I'm just going to play it a bit safe and say 29 minutes. 29 minutes, 60 minutes, and it's in milliseconds. So, 29 times 60, 29 minutes times 60 seconds times 1000 milliseconds. Alright, so if it is less than that, then we can return the bearer token. And this is in the format of bearer space, and you would put the access token here. Okay, so if it's still valid, all you do then when you call this function is return bearer plus access token. Okay. Now, if it is not valid, that means it's greater than 30 minutes. So now we need to check that the refresh token has not expired. So let's redo this. Except now this is the refresh time, and it's got to be longer than 90 days. So that's 90 days, 24 hours. 60 minutes. All right. Let's change that. Okay. So if it's greater than, so this means that it's expired. And this one means that the access token is still not expired. And if the refresh token is expired, then this is where we need to re-authenticate. So just put a placeholder here. And the question is, how do we show the side pane again? Let's figure that out later. But if the refresh token has not expired, so then we need to get a new bearer token using the non-expired refresh token here. Alright? So here you need to call the authentication API, very similar to this. So I'm going to copy all this out, say until here. Let's just put it all in here. Now I'm going to delete this because that might be different. The form data is slightly different for getting a new bearer token using a refresh token. So you can see some of that written here, right? So the grant type is not authorization code, but it is now refresh token. We don't need access type, we need a refresh token. So this one. And here then we need the value of our refresh token. And we don't have a code anymore. You don't need the redirect URI. So you just need these three parameters to be passed. Okay, post data. This is the same call. And you would call it, receive the results, get the text, and then get the JSON. And from there then you extract the access token. So you would have gotten a new access token with this call. Right? We need then to save that. So let's use user properties, set property. We'll use this one. Set the access token, save the access token into the user property space, and likewise update the time that we saved it. Okay. Now, what I have noticed is that sometimes the refresh token is also returned and sometimes it's not, but I have not figured out exactly when that happens. So basically, refresh token, if it's returned, also needs to be retrieved using the same sort of call. Right, and you use the same sort of things to save that refresh, except everything is now the refresh token. But the problem is that sometimes I've noticed that I do not get the refresh token, so we need to put another function to check whether the item was returned or not. And that is using this function. to see if the refresh token exists, and if it does, then only do we save it. Okay, and at this point now we can then return the bearer token because it's now a new one, new access token obtained, so we can return that here. Alright, so that completes the get bearer token function. Let's save that. So we've now written the function to get the bearer token, taking into consideration the validity of the bearer token and the refresh tokens. And so now let's write a function, finally, to get a quote, a stock quote. Alright? So let's make a new function to return the quote. Let's call that amtd get quote, and we need to know what stock we would like to get, so let's put that in variable stock symbol. Okay, so all that work in creating the bearer token is now a simple thing. Say the authorization is going to be in that format, you know, the bearer space and the bearer token. Alright, this one. So this will return the bearer token taking into consideration all the validity, right? And now it is time to call the URL. So I'm going to copy this. Let's just take all that and put it here. The method of these URLs is not a post method, so we don't need the form data, and it's going to be a get method. All right. And there's going to be a headers that's going to be passed on. And here's where we can send over the authorization, which is the bearer token. And finally, the API key is also here. Now the URL can be seen under quotes, and it's a single quote. And the format, you can see there's an embedded stock symbol in there. So here's what it's going to look like. And here's your stock symbol. Right? And the rest here then would be correct, so it'll fetch the result from the URL, come back as the contents in JSON, And now instead of access token, we're looking at the results. So the JSON structure, you can see that you can get various variables. These are all the keys and key and value pairs, right? So what we're looking for is the stock symbol and the stock, well, actually the stock price. So we just need stock price, and let's just say that we will use the closing price. All right, so closing price, and we can put that here and extract the close price and return that. That's the stock price. Okay, so let's save that. Now just a minor thing, I actually don't like the name of this function because it's actually in the format of a string, so let's call that getBearer string instead. Not just a token, but you know, a returning bearer space, and that's so it's really the bearer string. Save that. So let's now test it out on the spreadsheet, and we're going to use this function right here, and we're going to take the value of the stock from cell B3, and let's see what we get. Well, it did fetch something, but it's a blank, so let's see what's going on. And basically close price is returning as a blank, so if we can see what the contents that were returned, let's put that, save. Yes, so this is where we can see. Let's wrap that. So the contents is returning as I see, so it's multiple objects, so it's returning an object for Apple, and then it's another object here with JSON values. So we need to retrieve the first object, which is the same as the stock symbol object. Alright, so this one was not enough. Basically, you've got the JSON contents. We also need the stock object, so let's call that stock. And we can take that as the stock symbol. It should be the same. And then you should be able to get the close price, but not from JSON, but this is from stock. Let's see if that works. Alright, and that does. So that returned the value of Apple. Let's try a different stock symbol, Google. Alright, and Intel. Excellent. Okay, so everything's working, at least for now. We do need to see for the situations when it times out and whether it does update the access token when it expires, as well as a refresh token. But I guess you should be able to get the gist of it and debug that if you need to. And the final thing I'd like to do is, as mentioned, to make a separate file for all the Ameritrade script. So let's do that. A new script file, and this is just for Ameritrade. And in that, I'm going to put all the AMTD functions, which is practically everything. And put it all in here. Okay, this should still work. Right, so does. Excellent. So for the second example, let's look at obtaining an options price. Okay, and in that one, there are quite a few more parameters for options. There's the symbol, there's the contract type, the strike price, the expiry date, the price type, whether it's ask or bid, and finally we expect to see the price of the option. So here again we can perhaps look at, let's say, Google, and you want a put option at, let's say, 1,450, expiring 20th March. And yes, I'm using the British sort of format for date and ask, and here I would like to get the price, right? So here's where we start writing our program. You've got to get the quote, so let's do get the option price. So there are quite a few variables for the option price as we saw. So the first one, let's call that stock symbol again. There's the contract type, the strike price, and the expiry date. And the price type. Okay, and this one is alright. So key variables. The first thing that we need to see, let's look at the API. Need the API key. Here's the URL to call. You need the API key, the symbol, contract type, strike count, number of strikes above and below, if you need. But in this example, I'm just going to look at the just one, right? The strike itself. Then all these others are not really needed. For strategy, we're going to look at the strike price. None of this. So a lot of these are maybe not necessary unless you're going to more advanced stuff, but you can certainly use them if you need to. A whole ton of stuff. Okay. And the response in the JSON also has quite a lot of objects, and underlying, that's where all the price information is that we're interested in. Okay, so the interesting thing to note here is that for dates, and for the expiry dates, the format is stated here: year, month, date, right? So we just need to make sure that we format the date as required. So the first thing to do here is to set up the variables, and the expiry date, we need to format it correctly, so let's do that. We can use the format date function. And this is where we take the date, time zone, for my case it's GMT +8, and the format that we need, 4 digits for the year, month, and day. And let's make sure it's a string. Okay. We're going to need to call, so let's just use that as our template. Get the authorization, options, it's still a get option, authorize API key, this one stays the same. Now we need some additional options. We basically need to capture the parameters that we need. So I've tried playing around with it, and these are the additional options that I do need to tag on to the URL. You'll see what I'm doing soon, but basically I'm constructing the option chain to add to the URL. So this is the stock symbol. Then I'll do the contract type. Okay, it's all here, so I need the contract type. And that's this. I'll need the strike price. The expiry date. The expiry date, it's actually both from and to, so I'll need the from date and to date to be the same. So from date, I'll use the expiry date, and the to date, oops, let's fix that syntax. And also the expiry date here. Okay, that is my string of parameters that I need to get the price. URL is this. And here's where I tag on the option string that I just created. Okay, I don't need this. So then this will then fetch the result from that URL. Looks good. Pass the JSON, get contents. Now here's where it would differ again based on the format of the JSON that's returned. So the best way to actually study the JSON format is to display that, and we don't need all this for now. And we can return the contents so that we can actually see what that looks like. Let's save that. And we can call this function right here. Now I should copy this whole thing out so that I can remember where the variables are. So the first one is stock symbol. It's over here. Contract type, strike price, expiry date, and the price type. And let's see what we get. Okay, we get this error. And often you need to refresh the sheet if there are too many changes. I think that's always advisable. Alright, and when it's refreshed here, we see the actual format of the JSON object that's returned. It's going to be pretty huge. Okay, when we refresh, we often lose the script editor, so let's open that up again. Okay, so here we can see the return object and figure out how to pass the contents. Now the most important thing to note, first one is status, and if it could successfully retrieve the records, you will get a success status, so it is good to check for that. And the second one then are the maps. So you'll notice there are two date maps, the call expiry date map and the put expiry date map. And depending on whether it was a call or put, or you can ask for both too, then you'll get different objects. So in this case, we're looking for the put. So you can see the put date map has an object in there. That object has the date of expiry embedded in there as well, and then it's got the price, the strike price, another object as well, and it's an array, right? So because you can have strike counts of more, up and down as well. So this is an array, and the first array returns the actual data that we need. So we can see the bid and ask price is embedded here. Okay, so that's where the information lies, and we just need to figure out how to navigate the contents to get to the correct information. So this is how I've managed to navigate it. Let's take this off. Now the first thing we need is to look at the status to make sure that it was a success, right? So that one was a simple one, JSON, and the name was status. Right, status. And so if it was successful, let's make sure it's capital success. Then only we continue with processing. The first thing that we need is the map name, so call or put. So map name, and we'll use the contract type. It's based on the contract type, And you notice that it's got to be in lowercase. And add on to that expiry date map. Okay, so that should get the map name in this format, which returns this object, and the object has a date. Now the date, you notice, is a bit interesting. They've added on this extraneous information here, but we really can only compare for this is what we created, so we'll need to search for the date that has the expiry date that we want. So let's get that map. So this is called is a put or call map. Is the JSON object of map name. And basically, there may be more than one date returned depending on how you call it. If you call for more expiry dates, if you're checking for that, you would need to navigate that as well. So the way I've coded it is to use a for next loop to navigate the objects to find the one that I need. And so basically I search all the keys, and if the key has the expiry date in it, right, so it's greater than -1, then I would have found the correct date information that I need. And so then let's get that date map out, and this is part of this object now, and it's K1. Okay, so now I have the correct date. Next one, I need to navigate that and get the correct strike price. So if you notice here, after I've got the right date, I need to get the strike price. And also I do notice that they have decimal places as well. So another for next loop. Let's use K2 for the next key. And if K2 has the strike price, make that into a string because I can't control the decimal places. So if I found the correct strike price, then I know this one has the information that I need. So let's call this a price map, and that's an object in this K2. Okay, the second key. Now in the price map, you notice that it's an array, right? This square brackets, there is an array. So you could have more than one. In our example, we just need the first element in the array. So we can access the first element in the array by using this price map. The first element 0, and lastly the price that we need is just an object in the price, and this one should be based on price type, whether it's a bid or ask, right? So with this, then we can return that number. Now if it wasn't successful, then we can return something else. Let's just return a 0 for now. Okay, let's save that. Alright. Great, it returned the price of $55 for this option. Okay, so we can change that to try different parameters. And it looks like it's working correctly. Fantastic. Alright, so everything's working. Well, that's all the examples I have for you, and I'm sure you can